Round, please. The bad news is you've got me again. I didn't know. Okay, folks, you're all very welcome to this masterclass on the Wigan deal. I do want to welcome you on behalf of the Chief Executive Forum. We have apologies from David Sterling, who's the chair of the Chief Executive Forum. I'm a CEF board member. I was also here. So, as I say, you've got me again, but I very much hope you'll not be hearing too much from me. It is great to have a good spread of people from across the wider public sector. For those of you who have been at the NICON conference over the last 2 days, that the importance of and benefit of true partnership working right across all sectors, but including and particularly those of us within the public sector in delivering the changes that we need for our citizens, regardless of whether they're seen as health changes or anything else, was really one of the strong themes. So it's really good, as I say, to see good representation from right across the public sector. Pleased in particular to see so many of our colleagues from local government, given you've got such an instrumental role in this agenda. So again, you're all very welcome. A number of people in the room have already heard from our colleagues from Wigan. So it's Alison Mackenzie-Folan, who is the Chief Executive of Wigan Council, and Professor Kate Ardern, who is the Director of Public Health from Wigan Council. And at the risk of upsetting anybody, it was one of the most positive feedback from any of the sessions over the last 2 days. They were all wonderful, but there was particularly positive feedback and a lot of discussion. I heard a lot of chat after the session over coffee about the approach you took in Wigan and the opportunities that might present here, and how it aligns with some of the work that is already being done here through community planning and so on. But does it identify anything that gives us an opportunity to do more or go further? So there are quite a few people here who have already heard from Kate and Alison, having been here earlier. So I'm not going to in any way try to do a poor attempt at summarising the approach. Let's hear directly from Alison and Kate themselves. And then whenever we've had the opportunity to do that, we want to get into some good quality discussion among ourselves. What are the implications for that? How does that relate to what we're doing here? And are there any particular actions or next steps? It would be really good to leave here this afternoon with a few tangible things that we think we need to do to continue to move this agenda forward. So as I say, we'll hear from Alison and Kate. We'll have an opportunity just maybe to take any immediate reflections and questions for them, and then we'll get into some of that wider discussion. So, Alison and Kate, over to you. Thank you.
Roughly how many people were here this morning? Right, so not everybody. We've managed to establish that. So, hi everybody, my name's Alison Mackenzie-Folan. I'm Chief Exec at Wigan Council and the Place-Based Lead for Health and Care Integration under the new ICS arrangements. Kate and I are just going to do maybe a canter through the slides. We did a slide set this morning that are a little bit longer. So we've got a summary version of those. So apologies for the people who were in the room this morning, but at least you get a chance to check whether what we said this morning is still the same, but it definitely will be. But what we thought we'd do is we'll do a quick slide set, because I think, as you said, the most important element perhaps of this session is to open up the discussion so we can hear and talk a little bit further and maybe delve deeper into some of the issues. And as you said, more importantly, hopefully move to action, which is what we all need to do. So on that basis, and we've also got a video to show you. So I'm going to do a few slides and then I'm going to hand over to Kate. I've done this one earlier, so Who's been to? We did. So when we were on earlier, Matthew played Northern Soul music, which Wigan is famous for. Kate had a much better attempt than me to do a bit of a dance across the floor. I was too embarrassed and shy. But has anybody been to Wigan? Well, we've got a few people who want to come. One person's been to Wigan. So, oh, you're all coming to Wigan? Yes. We're going to have a party in Wigan, and somebody's been to our famous fancy dress parties on a Boxing Day. So yeah. So for those who haven't, we're smack in the middle of the northwest in England. Great location. We're not just Wigan. We've got 14 proud towns. It's really important when we're thinking about our communities that we celebrate all our communities. It's a big borough, so those communities are quite different. You know, the difference between Wigan and Leigh is quite stark, and that's through heritage, history, families, connections. As I say, we are a big borough, so there's 325,000 residents. We're the second largest in Greater Manchester, part of the combined authority. So we work as 10 councils very much together as a team, and we're the 9th largest borough in the country. We also have a rich mining heritage, which Kate will pick up on in terms of some of those health inequalities, things that we've been looking at over many years, and some of the progress that we've made. But lots of that mining heritage is now being changed into beautiful green spaces. So again, linking to health in terms of nature, biodiversity. And just a couple of weeks ago on that photo there, it's one of our flashes. So reclaimed land that's been turned into open water with amazing biodiversity. And one of the things that we're trying to do is get our local people out into there as part of their own well-being. And then a massive sporting tradition, which is really important to us with rugby and football. We hosted the Rugby League World Cup at the moment, and we had the Women's Euros, but community sports big, and investing in community sports really good in terms of people's health and well-being and changing their lives. And we've got many stories of people who perhaps might have had a different path in life if they'd not joined their local sports club. So part of our role has been to really think about sport, again, alongside health and well-being. So the work that we've been doing in Wigan really takes into account Marmot's 6 pillars. So we've been looking at these throughout our development and really thinking, what does that mean in terms of our approach and what we're trying to do. And essentially our approach was born out of austerity. And what we've been trying to do is take a really citizen-led, a human relationship approach to local government service and working with the NHS. So bringing together our services in an integrated way around the person. And that's very much what we've been trying to do in terms of our transformational journey. And it was born out of austerity, but it was built on lots of other good work, which Kate will talk to you about. But lots of it was a package of things that came together. So we'd been working with Hilary Cottam. You may have read her book, Radical Help, which talks about actually thinking about how we radically redesign society to really think about humans and human relationships. We've done some innovative work with Nesta, thinking about actually what is it to work deep in your communities? Do we really know our communities? Many people in their jobs now feel quite removed from their communities. They're not embedded in their communities anymore. They don't know who lives on particular streets. They don't know people who are down the community centre, the real community activists, the real citizen-led leadership that actually is behind a lot of the deal. So we'd pulled all of these programmes together. We also had a programme called Building Self-Reliance. And actually we thought we need to change our approach. We can't go into austerity without hope, without positivity, without actually trying to do something radically different in terms of those relationships and what we were trying to do at the heart of the Wigan deal. We didn't want sort of a death by 1,000 cuts. We didn't want to be talking to a staff about what they can't do anymore because we haven't got any money. So it was trying to turn everything on its head. And what we developed through that was this way of trying to say, we've all got a part to play in society, and if we empower our communities, our individuals, we give them the power and we let them come up with the solutions, whether it's our staff, whether it's our community groups, our businesses, then together we'll find much better collective solutions. So shifting our mindset in the council to being perhaps traditional, very paternalistic, thinking we know best, to actually saying, how do we have a conversation? How do we listen to our communities for them to be able to come forward? and actually think about how they play their part and how we play our part. And this is why you get this, in effect, this contract and this unifying philosophy that we've had for many, many years that sort of bonds us together. So the principles, people say, so I still don't get what you mean, Alison and Kate, we don't quite understand what you're talking about or what actually goes on behind this. And I think we're quite humble about this, that these principles have worked for us. They might not work for everybody, but they just worked for us. And one of the first things was, having worked with some of the early projects with the work that I talked about earlier, we really went hard and at scale on what does it mean to have a different conversation. Staff went on 2 days training courses to actually become mini ethnographers. An anthropologist ran the course who took staff through that journey themselves about what does it mean when you really have a deep conversation with somebody. So staff, in effect, learned to change their mindset about what it was to talk to people, because many of our staff had felt disconnected from their communities through the way we'd set ourselves up in terms of traditional sort of silo mentality. And also think because, legislation and tick lists and everything else led them into a situation that when they'd walk into someone's house and perhaps they were doing some rehabilitation or assessment, they'd already decided what was wrong with Alison. And they'd put me onto a tick list and never actually asked me what my hopes, fears, aspirations, dreams and everything else was. And by asking our staff to flip the conversation into a much more positive one about asking Alison what does she dream about, what would she really like to do, the fact that she's not particularly mobile, the fact that she can't go out, but actually she really likes embroidery or she really likes, engaging in art. So there's a local community group down the road. Maybe we could have a different conversation about doing the things that matter rather than the things that she can't do. So very much around scaling that up, and it was scaled across the council colleagues, all parts of the council, and then all parts of the NHS. So we actually had a whole floor of a bit of a redundant office building where we had a Wigan experience that people went into, and they understood what the journey was for a different conversation. GPs went into their primary care, nurses, the council staff, and they took time to learn what it meant to work in a different way. We also spent time asking our staff in the early days to get to know their communities better. Go out and find 85% of our staff live in the borough that they work in. And we said, go out and find out what's going on. We actually had people who were known as community link workers, and Kate will talk more about that. We've really embraced what it means to, as our director of adult services would say, go and put your trainers on and go out and find out what's going on. We actually did bus tours for people at one point, didn't we, where we connected businesses with community groups to say, did you know there's a business down here and a community group here? If you actually start talking to each other, you could really help each other. So we did a lot of work on getting to know your community better, and that's paid dividends because it's helped us know where all of the people are who can make a difference. And out in the communities, there's some amazing activists. They're the ones who will tell you that the council's particularly rubbish or not doing great, but they'll also be the one who'll be your greatest ally if you want to get things done. So knowing who those people are has been really important to us, and supporting them and believing in them and investing in them is part of our journey too. Then co-locating teams, so very much about bringing housing, the police, NHS, schools, education together in our neighbourhoods. So that's very much, and Kate will talk about how that's been aligned to primary care networks. And you can see on the map there how we've divided up the borough to really work deep in our neighbourhoods. And then trying to grow community capacity is really important to us. So going out and finding out that actually some people do want to go into social care. They're happy to set up their own charities or businesses and actually invest in those, and commissioning differently to think about the solutions to some of the crisis that we're in could be actually in our community itself. And that's been particularly important to us in home care, residential care, and our work, particularly in terms of integration. And then the other thing is around permissions and freedoms. So I think we've talked about that a lot today, but very much around not having a blame culture, giving, if people make a mistake, and it's okay to make a mistake and move on, and giving that freedom and innovation, because you go out to ask staff or community groups or partners, people often know the solutions, but there's some sort of block in the system, whether it's politics, whether it's relationships, whether it's our own sort of functions within the organisation. You find these blockages, don't you? So it's actively saying, so what are the blockages? How do we sort it out? And giving those permissions for people to really think differently. And then again, someone talked about it earlier in terms of attitude. Attitude is so important. If you've got the wrong attitudes in an organisation, none of this is going to work. So you need to talk about the values and the behaviours of the organisation virtually every day. And I think one of the things that we've learned is that sometimes, just having them on the shelf or using them once a year or doing something in your performance appraisal process is just a total waste of time, really, because people don't live and breathe them. They don't become those things. So actually embedding them, the cultural journey was as difficult and is as important, if not the most important thing to really think about. And then the recipe really for things that have worked for us that may work for you. Maybe you could take one or two things there and have a go at them, but certainly these are the things that work for us. So we had a hook. We didn't have a narrative that was in one part of the system, one part of the organisation. Everybody was hooked into the concept of what it meant to work in this way. And that then becomes profound, because it isn't just a project, it isn't just someone doing a transformation project, it actually becomes a social movement for change. And when you get that social movement for change, people get passionate about wanting to do things differently, and they really feel invested. They feel that you believe in them. They want to do things differently. So for us, it was really tapping in to why we're all public servants and why we get up in the morning. And people really valued that and recognised it. It also takes leadership. So obviously within the local authorities, we're working in a political environment, and this is very much about the politicians driving the agenda, but alongside the relationship between the officers and the politicians, it has been really positive and really strong, even when there's been bumpy decisions along the way, and you've got to back each other. And again, that no blame culture needs to extend to all relationships, particularly the politics can be really difficult. I'm sure it is in many of your organisations and places. So holding firm and really being truthful to each other about what that journey is. If you're not being honest, so the relationships certainly in Wigan, Kate, weren't they? Were really strong between politicians and officers, and we learnt to trust each other, and we learnt to call each other out when things weren't going particularly right. And then I've talked at length about the different relationships and the permissions. And then redesigning systems, so really sort of working on, thinking about how do you sort of, I suppose it's like test and fail, isn't it? Doing something, it doesn't matter if it doesn't work, move on, let's do something else. So that call to action, keep moving. The session that Kate and I did this morning, there was Sultan and Dan doing some talking around the sort of digital strategy in Northern Ireland, and it was really interesting around how much we really need to all be digital leaders. And part of our innovation in Wigan is to very much embrace what is digital leadership. How do you bring on new innovations, new technology? How do you think about that? And then really thinking about, I mentioned earlier about commissioning. How do we commission differently? And which parts of the organisation are blocking? Where are they? Talk about it and do something about it. This is probably the most important slide, I think. Certainly the ones I'm going to do and then hand over to Kate. This is what we're about in Wigan, and we talk about it all the time. I meet every new recruit that joins the organisation, whether they're joining as a lawyer, a green space worker, someone who works as a community worker, wherever and we talk about what it means. And I say to them, congratulations, you've joined the organisation, because when you came for an interview, we tested you on these things, because we only want people with that attitude who can be courageous, who can be accountable, positive and kind, and they sit within everything that we do, and we talk about them all the time. We have sessions with our staff, listening to action sessions with the politicians and officers, and we talk about them. We have big conversations where we ask staff to unpack these. So what is it when I'm courageous and what is it when I'm not courageous? And similarly, all of the other three there. So they're really, really embedded because it's really important about how we do our work. And this has been ultimately the cultural journey about talking about these behaviours all of the time. And the Be Kind one is really, really important. And we talked about that earlier today. There's kindness and compassion, kindness and leadership. And the way we talk about it in Wigan is to say, it's not a sign of weakness. It's not a sign of an organisation that you can't make tough decisions. It's not a sign of actually, being overly positive about everything. But it is actually just a sign that we are humans together and we need to have that compassion. Now more than ever, it's so important. We live in such a divisive world and we need to stick with kindness. And so we talk about that as an organisation. A few pictures of our community groups, but they are so important to us. We believe in them and they have been amazing. They've been on this journey with us and we've got so many community activists who have done most of the work actually. They've been the ones who perhaps should be up here talking rather than Kate and I, because they are so passionate about supporting their local communities. So I'm going to hand over to Kate to do a few slides. We've then got a very, very short video which hopefully brings to life some of the work we've done, and then we're going to open it up into more of a discussion. Thanks, Kate.
Thanks, Al. I'll bring it down because I'm slightly shorter. Hello. One thing that will be different, I think, between what Alison and I are describing and your experience here in Northern Ireland is that I'm a doctor, but I was a council chief officer. So public health in England, through the Lansley reforms, returned to its ancestral and rightful home, by the way, in local government. But Wigan was a little bit unusual because I'd actually been working across the NHS as an exec director in our old primary care trust and as a chief officer in Wigan Council since 2008. So I was a joint appointment. And I think that was actually a very far-sighted, approach from Wigan. And I think particularly from Peter Smith, actually, Alison, who was our late former council leader, thinking about that wider well-being perspective and the need to bring that focus back into local government, where it so rightfully belongs. If you look at all the history, is very important. And sort of picking up Alison's theme here, that geography, that sense of place, is absolutely crucial to people's well-being. Never more so, actually, we found during COVID, when our social geography in Wigan, despite being the second biggest borough in Greater Manchester, and by the way, that population is bigger than a number of UK cities in our borough, at 325,000, actually, that sense of history, tradition and social networks means that our population tend to actually socialise with Chorley, with Warrington, with St Helens, the rugby league boroughs, and also the former heart of the Lancashire coalfield, the former mining communities. If you notice our demographic, we're a predominantly white borough. We do have, different traditions and cultures within the borough. In the east of the borough in Lee, never ever tell a Leither that they're a Wiganer, by the way, if you really want to, get out alive, as it were. But Leithers, in Lee, there is a tradition of Eastern European migration to the old coal mines, because Eastern Silesia in Poland was a former mining community as well. Whereas if you look at our neighbours our geographical neighbours in Bolton in Greater Manchester, you will see a much more diverse population because they're a former cotton town. So understanding some of the context around the demographic and social mix is incredibly important, and it informs a lot of what we do around health, which is why Michael Marmot's report on Fairer Society, Healthy Lives was so crucial. And part of that thinking was about getting away from a more professionally led approach to health and wellbeing. We do not do traditional health promotion or health education in Wigan. In fact, had I inherited that 14 years ago, it would have got scrapped, quite frankly, because the only people who read leaflets and posters are basically middle-class folks. It doesn't get to the people who you really need to get to, and you really need to actually engage. The approach of actually investing in people's ideas and creativity and experience, community experience, is absolutely crucial here. So part of developing the Wigan deal was to actually work with modelling ourselves very much on North Karelia in Finland, who had transformed their experience of cardiovascular disease, the biggest single cause of preventable premature mortality for them in the 1970s, and for Wigan, in the 2000s. They'd done it by a grassroots movement for change and pushing a whole societal, whole system approach. They were spending lots of money on it, but it was all on cardiology, when actually what they needed to do was to push that investment upstream. But that linked with a very much grassroots champion movement. So we also partnered up with the Royal Society of Public Health and started to create that citizen-led approach to public health, which now has 23,000 citizens of all ages engaged. We bring people in according to what they're interested in, using a level 2 qualification, which of course is GCSE level, and entry level to health and social care. I've put five budding doctors through that particular programme, for example. So in terms of growing your own workforce, it's a really good way of engaging people. We've also found, particularly working with our VCSE sector, that for many people, this was the first exam they'd ever passed. Can you imagine getting to the age of 40, 50, being always told you're a failure, and you do begin to believe it, and then passing your first exam, and suddenly realising you're not a failure at all. You've got knowledge, skills and experience which are absolutely vital. And we were getting this back, particularly from women in the borough, an absence of praise. Very important, and can't be understated how that confidence and self-belief is incredibly important, because people do not want to be healthy to save the NHS. Sorry, NHS colleagues. They don't want to be healthy to save 4-hour trolley waits in A&E or the elective waiting list. They want to be healthy because they've got hope, confidence and belief in their own futures and those of the families and loved ones that they have. So the Health Champions programme is incredibly important, and it links in to all the work we do, for example, on debt management, on fuel poverty, on food insecurity, because you've got to get all of those things right as well. That has to be part of that deal programme. We've also borrowed some really good practice from elsewhere, not just North Karelia. One of the things, and I said this morning, that we used to hear 14 years ago, and it was a contrast to where I'd worked previously in Liverpool, where you have a very engaged community who will always challenge, rightly so, people who are decision makers. We didn't have that in Wigan. We now have much more challenge. Actually, that's a good thing, not a bad thing. It's a really good thing that the community is much more challenging. But we used to hear from professionals, it's good enough for Wigan. And what they meant by that was not something they would have ever accepted as being good enough for themselves. We see that across a number of fields, and I would say you would see that across a number of what are euphemistically described as left-behind communities or left-behind towns. Poverty of aspiration for that community. And what we try and do is actually foster the confidence and empowerment of those citizens that we're very proud to serve. When Chris Naylor and Dan Wellings did the King's Fund Independent Report on Wigan, It was really interesting. They went out and talked to our staff, they talked to the community. And I said to Chris, give me some initial thoughts as they were coming back. And I think a really powerful comment, and I think it really speaks to what Alison said about that investment in and belief in our frontline staff to do things differently. He said, I don't care whatever any else we find in Wigan, the one thing I can definitely say is you've given your staff their vocation back. Vocation's a very old-fashioned word, but it's a very important word. So, building on people's ideas, we've worked, for example, with our earlier settings and schools on the Daily Mile. And much to my delight, the earlier settings came back after we started the Daily Mile. We worked with Elaine Wiley, the inspirational head teacher from Scotland, whose great idea that was. And the earlier guys came back and said to us, we like this day. Can we do something with the under fives? And we'll call it the Daily Toddle. Brilliant. So all our primary schools do the Daily Mile. Our early years folks do the Daily Toddle. We sold that one back to Scotland, by the way. I'm always trying to be entrepreneurial in some things. And our young health champions, incredibly important in terms of building up confidence and knowledge early on in life. So, I have 7 and 8-year-olds in the borough who know far more about how to look after their heart than I ever did when I first went to med school, which I have to say is more than 40 years ago now. Has it made a difference? Well, yeah. I mean, when this slide's a very important one. When I first went to Wigan 14 years ago, every single health stat was going in the wrong direction. So the gap between us and England was widening. What we're seeing, and clearly we have to factor in some impacts from, for example, COVID, but also, Brexit impacts as well. But what we've seen is a trend that's bucked England's. We're improving. Very unusual for a community like Wigan to start to turn around things like healthy life expectancy. And we started to see this trend being bucked within 5 years of starting the deal. Or an electoral cycle. Well, possibly not in Westminster terms at the moment, but Larry the Cat apparently has been asked to be PM, but yeah, grown up in charge for once. The point being, in a normal sort of council electoral cycle, it's actually something that gives politicians confidence. And if you build in the measures around, for example, smoking prevalence, around benefits, around investing in fuel poverty, etc., on A&E admissions, you start to build that evidence around what works and build the confidence in doing something different. Public health does not take 25 years to deliver. It can deliver within an electoral cycle. What does that mean for our integrated care landscapes? Well, very important. That geography, that sense of place, those 14 townships are how we organise everything. And it's the geography that the community understands. The organisations fit our geography around the community geography. And that includes the NHS. So when our primary care networks were being set up, and fantastic leadership from Tim Dalton, who's the chair, was the chair of our clinical commissioning group, instead of going with their mates, because we'd organised and we were doing the deal around our 14 townships with our registered populations, schools, GPs, very important to bring them together if you think about the whole family, then our GPs felt it was a no-brainer to organise the primary care networks around the same geography. So in other words, we've got coterminous community geography that recognises and respects the way in which the community operates. That importance of asset-based and actually investing in the skills and incubating the ideas of the community, absolutely critical. And thinking about that investment in health and well-being, about developing the economy, the skills, skilling up for the future. It links to things like the climate change agenda, for example, and seeing this as whole system leadership. I was just the person with the job title of being Director of Public Health. I've always seen what I'm about is being an expert on tap as opposed to being an expert on top. And every single citizen is actually their own DPH. Very, very important sort of distinction about empowering and fostering the leadership of others. And it is beholden on experts to do that. In other words, share the knowledge, give up the power, be a servant leader. What does that mean in terms of the sort of going forward for the Deal 2030? Well, I'm now not part of Wigan's journey, and it's been a huge privilege over 14 years to be that, but I sadly turned 60 in January, so I had to retire and move on, as it were. But that's important, actually, because it's about passing on the torch, isn't it, to others, and not seeing yourself, either individuals or a team or a single team, as being, the solution to everything. It's about being a steward, and I think stewarding is a really important concept. So Marmot, 10 years on, Michael and his team have also done work in Greater Manchester, which is incredibly important. That community wealth and health building, working with the Centre for Local Economic Studies and others on building community assets. And we've learnt a lot, haven't we, Alison, from our colleagues in East Ayrshire around community empowerment legislation in Scotland. We haven't got that in England, but we've taken some elements of that to help us with it. We don't have a university based in the borough, but we've developed a formal partnership with Edge Hill College, who are a new med school, and through some of my links, very good connections, obviously with the King's Fund, with Salford University, with Chester University and others, to actually bring in that sort of academic and formal expertise to help us evaluate what we're doing. Very important to do that. And as Alison said, learn from what doesn't work as well as much as what does work. I guess a sort of great anecdote from Stuart, actually, our Director of Adult Social Care and Health. The first time he knew about this was opening the pages of the Wigan Evening Post and seeing the headline, "Rusty rocks up at Heathside." Heathside is one of our care homes, 2 care homes that the council still runs. And Natalie, who's the fantastic manager there, had been doing reminiscence work with her residents, found that they all had been to Blackpool on holiday and loved riding donkeys. So she brought about Blackpool Donkey in. As Stuart said, before the deal, what would have happened is risk assessments in triplicates, going through various stages of management. He'd have had to sign it off. Alison would have had to sign it off. And probably someone at some point would have said no because it's too risky. The first Stuart knew about it was reading it in the pages of the Wigan Evening Post. And as he said, the deal works because Natalie felt empowered to do that. And he said, I'm sure she did a risk assessment on whether the donkey would poo on the floor or bite a resident. Fine. That's the point. That's staffing empowerment and engagement. And the opposite of that, and I think it's important to sort of look at a story where, something didn't quite go right, but again, that no-blame culture was one of our OTs always took a group of adults with learning disabilities out to one of the local cafes. She did her deal training and thought, I've never asked them what they really want to do. So the next time she met them, she said, and they were in the cafe, she said, what do you actually enjoy doing? And to a person, they said, we like roller skating. You know what's going to come next, don't you? So they all started going roller skating and did, all the risk assessments, but one of them fell over and had a Colles fracture, of course. Now, did we blame her? No, of course not. They're still roller skating to this day, by the way, this group. Because, as I pointed out at the time, one of them could have easily tripped over the leg of a chair in the cafe and ended up with a Colles fracture, because accidents do happen. The right risk assessments were done, the right support was given to her in terms of doing the right thing and doing the thing that her clients actually really enjoyed doing and still enjoy doing to the day. And you know how easy it would have been, don't you, to stop that activity? Actually, we didn't. We said, carry on, do it. And for me, that's really liberating to be able to take those kind of decisions. So what's our key learning? Well, I'm going to, I think you're going to enjoy hearing the wee video that we have, because I think it brings it to life, what it's like to be a resident in Wigan. But for me, working with the coalition of the willing is incredibly important. There will always be blockers in the system. They're often professional, they may be community, they may be political, but find the people who share the same philosophy and work with them. And you never know, you might make some really interesting friends. Tell the story of place. There is no one-size-fits-all model. Alison and I can share our learning, the journey we've been on, and some principles, but nothing can simply be imposed on a community. You've got to go out and work with the community and develop your own narrative. But telling the story of place is as important as the statistics. And you may think that's really surprising coming from a director of public health, but context is everything. Stuart has another phrase which we always love, infecting the NHS with wellness. The NHS is great at sickness because that's what it was designed to do. But if you go back and look at the original models for the NHS, particularly the Peckham Centre, it was very much around a wellbeing model and a local authority place-based model as well, interestingly. World War II changed that because of the context. Look at where places that have done whole societal, whole system approach and see what you can learn from them, because we certainly were inspired by North Karelia. And I have to say, North Karelia is how we should be doing it across the United Kingdom. We have the same problems. They've gone from being one of the worst, as they were in the 1970s, to now being one of the best internationally. It's been well researched by WHO. But we didn't, because it wasn't invented, certainly in England. So look at that best international practice and see what's relevant to your experience. And now we say in Wigan, it's not good enough for Wigan, only the best is good enough for Wigan. And I think that should always be the mantra, if you like. Move to that using expertise in a really democratising way, so that expert on tap rather than on top. And I guess that means with that investment in communities' ideas, you can't just socially prescribe to something unless you invest in it, by the way. It's about citizen-led public health, citizen-led health and well-being. Some really good links here, which I'm sure you'll want to go away and explore. And I'm now going to hand over to our own citizens to talk. Can we have the video, please? Thank you.
Well, next to the Rugby League club that is reaching out to supporters with dementia, Wigan Warriors have set up a Rugby Memories group where fans of the team meet up once a week to watch an old game and reminisce about the glory days.
The club hopes the scheme will also help tackle loneliness in the community. Chris Hall went along to this week's meeting where a very special guest dropped by.
I first went when I was 17 to watch Wigan, and I'm 89 now, so I've served my apprenticeship.
Mary and Lily share more than a love of rugby league. Both have dementia and met after losing their husbands. But they found comfort remembering the other men in their lives, those wearing cherry and white.
Favourite memory was Billy Boston, Eric Ashton, Johnny Lorison. Do you remember Johnny Lorison? Reminiscing
about their favourite players isn't just nostalgic, it's therapeutic. Here at the Verklempt Cafe, in the heart of Wigan Warriors HQ, a Rugby Memories group is open to anyone with and without dementia to protect against loneliness and social withdrawal.
They really come to life when they start to tell their stories about when they first started to watch the rugby. We have the old programmes, we have old photographs. Today some of the ladies brought their own photographs and shared those with the group. So it just brings those memories to life.
Especially when their favourite player, John Bateman, pops in to say hello.
We've got a visitor.
And invites them to watch his next match from the comfort of a corporate box.
I'll
never sleep tonight. And I'll never wash my face.
That was brilliant. Best day of my life. Never forget it. Never forget it, will we?
Can't wait for the 11th. We're in a box, aren't we? I'm going to go like this. I'm not going to be drinking tea. I can tell you that.
They've cheered Wigan to dozens of trophies, but those memories are slowly being taken away. Dementia is growing in the UK. 850,000 have it now. By the time John Bateman is in his 30s, 1 million of us will have it, enough to fill the DW Stadium 40 times over. So the Warriors are sending their young players to these sessions to learn how to care for those with dementia and to get tips on tackling technique.
He does more tackling than anybody in rugby league. For goodness sake, get the legs, he can't go without the legs.
Yeah, she'll tell me to tackle the legs because I can't run without the legs, so I'll have to go back to training and tell the lads. So yeah, we're good to come and see people like this and see how much it means to them, obviously, just to put a smile on their face and sit and just for her to turn around and say it was fantastic and one of the best days she's had. You know what I mean? It means a lot, and it's fantastic to see people like that.
John Bateman is our favourite player.
Oh, is it?
He will be when they go to watch him. He's in the memory-making business to keep the smiles on these faces. Chris Hall, ITV News, Wigan.
What a great pair.
Mary and Lily, you are superstars. We love you.
You need to get them in the dressing room.
Absolutely.
Now, still to come.
Isn't that just fantastic, you know? That's how we all want to be spending our later years. So thanks to Alison and Kate. And I can certainly say, and I hope it's the same for others who were here earlier, seeing and hearing that again, and you did make it different, but seeing and hearing that again, even more was coming out of it, of the benefits. It in no way felt repetitive, so thank you for that. Before we just get into a bit of discussion, a quick apology from me. I only realised when I sat down, I'm pretty sure I didn't even introduce myself, and that's because I've said my only excuse for that. I've spent the last 2 days up and off this stage constantly, but I am very conscious we're joined by other colleagues. So in case, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Michael Bloomfield, Chief Executive of the Ambulance Service and also Chair of NICON, and as I said, standing in today for David Sterling from the Chief Exec Forum. I think seeing that little video with Lily and Mary really brought out what I loved hearing about your approach. It's just the really practical nature of it, those small things you were saying, like bringing the donkey in, or the roller skating, or the bus trips. And I don't know to what extent that happens more widely, but it just sounds so refreshing, and it's about giving people, particularly at that stage of life, some continued quality and added in those latter years of life, just having that fun and that enjoyment, and what that must do for their overall well-being is remarkable. I also really liked, Alison, what you said, and I have to say it made me think a bit, that you meet every single new recruit to your organisation. And I'm sure we all like to think that, you know, we're very good at making sure we go along and speak to various groups, etc. But I'm just not sure how widespread that would be, a commitment to meet every single new recruit to your organisation and what that can do for organisational culture. I just think it is so important. So certainly a really interesting tip that I picked up. We're going to have an opportunity for some discussion, folks, some questions, if there are particular points that you would like to ask a little bit more detail about. And then, as I said at the start, I would quite like to see, can we turn that into, as Kate said, there is no one size fits all. So it's not a case of saying, this seems to be having great results in Wigan. What do we need to do it here? I'd like to see, can we explore some more discussion around how this compares to what we do here? Do we see opportunities from this approach? And if that is the case, to get some of those outcomes, if that is the case, what would that mean that we would need to do, if anything, that is different to what we're doing now? I think that would be quite a useful discussion to have towards the end. But before, say, we open it up a bit, going to ask David Burns, who's Chief Executive of Lisburn and Castlereagh Council, just to give us some initial thoughts he has, please.
Thank you, Michael. And thank you to Alison and Kate. I think it was a great presentation. Sorry I missed the session earlier on this morning. I think it would have been really valuable. How nervous did the young rugby player look? And I love the story about the roller skates, because it just made me think of my own circumstances. And I bought my son a trampoline when he was about 6, and I placed it too close to the house, and within 2 hours we were at the hospital with blood pouring down his head. Now, the bureaucrat in me might well have said, well, do away with the trampoline, but the sort of logical side would be just move it to a safer part of the garden, so that's what we did. I just felt it was a real great example of doing with rather than to, and I think that's a lesson that we need to take away from this today. It was refreshingly simple language without the overly jargonistic language that we'll use around about co-production, co-design, co-creation, and the rest of the nonsense. Getting the trainers on, rolling the sleeves up, it's all very similar, isn't it? Get out there and get to know your people and your communities. But as I blow into Northern Ireland, I think I can speak with an element of reflection on this as to my experiences since coming to Northern Ireland. And I find the people here really kind. So when Alison was talking about kindness and the like, some of that were already there. People want to do a good job and they are really friendly. So there's real good starting points there for us. Just in terms of that sort of whole health journey and the like, I feel that the people here, there's real strong family values. So some of the issues about empowering people to make their own decisions and looking after your older people, some of that already exists here. Some of the challenges, and from talking to Roisin just about the care, is it feels as if there's an underinvestment in the support that we can give to older people. That it's often just get them up in the morning, get their clothes on, and then you're out the door. But families themselves and communities maybe have a far bigger role to play there. We've got beautifully maintained towns and villages here. Yesterday I was at the Northern Ireland Amenity Council Best Kept Awards, and whether it was Donoghmore, Strangford, Randalstown or Royal Hillsborough, all these places were picking up awards, not for the role of the council or any other government agency, it's because of the role that all the communities play in really looking after those places. So we've got fabulous parks and greenways in the lake across Northern Ireland, but we've also got fantastic businesses, and the amount of innovation that exists in this country is absolutely remarkable. So those are really strong assets that I think we should be using to build on. What are we less good at? I don't think we're good at listening and taking on board feedback, and I think that's because of the fragmented nature of the public sector here. So if I go out to Anna Hilt, they couldn't care less whether I'm from the council, the roads department, education, health or wherever. They just want the thing done, and they don't want to hear about it's not my job and I'll have to refer it on to someone else, or I get a letter 2 weeks later to say that's not my department. So for me, that's a big issue that we need to overcome. Red tape generally, and it was interesting that Alison and Kate both pulled out just about bureaucracy. Bureaucracy, pace, decision making, blame. Blame's a big issue here. It's almost like you want to cover yourself so much so that nobody comes back and slags you for a decision you've made. Sometimes we just need to suck it up and get on with it. Fragmentation and risk, and the rollerblades was a key thing there for me. So what does all this mean for Northern Ireland? Well, in terms of councils, we couldn't do it on our own. We're too small. We're nowhere near a Wigan. It would take 3 of the councils in Northern Ireland simply to meet the demographic numbers that exist there in Wigan. So for me, with Roisin, along with Newry Morning Down and Ards and Northern Down, even Armagh Banbridge, what is the sort of collective opportunities that exist there on a sort of regional basis? But even just in terms of those other services that exist in terms of roads, education, how do we get people around the table to make a real good conversation going, but keeping the agility that exists in local government? So is community planning partnerships the right forum? if it is, how do we change the message so it's not just a talking shop? How do we start getting things done and start to make a change? Do we have the right organisational cultures to apply the Wigan deal model, or is there things that we're going to have to change before we get that? But how do we collectively support our staff and our communities to build on the strengths that we have that I've already mentioned? And is there things that need to change in our processes to allow us to make progress quicker? But in summary, I think we've got really strong assets here in Northern Ireland, and we've got really good people. So for me, it's just about cutting through the rubbish that exists and start to focus on the health and well-being that both Kate and Alison have referred to today. So hopefully that maybe just gets a wee bit of thinking, and I'll pass back to Michael for hopefully a raft of questions and thoughts from the floor as well. Okay, thank you.
Yep, thanks a lot for that, David. And I think actually you posed quite a few questions there towards the end of the sorts of things we need to be thinking about. So maybe just to kick things off, folks, any initial reactions, thoughts, queries, clarification, etc. for Alison and Kate on what you've heard? I'll kick one off while you're getting ready, but I was fascinated by the fact you said this was born out of austerity, and that over, I think it was a 10-year period, you delivered £170 million savings. And I can imagine our reaction might be, what's it going to cost to do this, as opposed to it was born out of austerity. Could you say something about that, please? How come that wasn't a constraint? How did austerity help trigger this?
Yeah, sorry, I'm just reflecting because it feels a long
time
We've
ago.
both been in 14 years. It feels a long time ago, and we've got another set of problems hitting us now, haven't we? But a lot of it was down to Lord Peter Smith and some of the work that had happened, and he was adamant that austerity wasn't going to destroy the council and the borough. So I think it was a strong political mandate that said we've got to do something different. I think the first thing. I think the fact that the relationships between the politicians and the senior team were so strong that you could have that really honest dialogue about, so what are we going to do? The issues around previous work where we were sort of fumbling around. We had a building self-reliance programme. We had lots of things so that they all seemed to come together at the same time. But we didn't ask, what's it going to cost to make this happen? It was actually, this is a moment. You know, this is a moment in time now where we need to radically think differently. But there'd been contributions along the way to help some of that thought processes. So although the deal concept was born in effect or became alive, there had been a lot of early work that sort of contributed to it. I think the other thing that we did, which we can talk about but it wasn't on the slides, is it also takes the financial part of our organisations to be a bit more open and risk-taking and less and more thinking about the long-term benefits of doing things. So, you know, having strong financial stewardship who are prepared to take risks, you know, thought through risks and do things differently. So what the other thing that we did was we set up, to do all of that work, we actually set up transformation reserves and funds to make sure that we could pump prime the work that we needed to do, rather than sort of just slash and burn. So we actually did some investment, and when we talked about the bureaucracy, we found out through that where some of the blockages were in the organisation. So I'm not going to sort of say it was in a particular part, but there are blockages in organisations. It's either individuals or particular teams, and I think having that much more transformational mindset helped us say, we need to get through these blockages. So I think it was a combination of things. It wasn't sort of a, something that we dreamt up overnight. There was lots of contributions, but Kate might want to add her thoughts.
Yeah, I was. Okay. Oh yeah. Can you hear me? Yeah. Yeah. It was also looking at taking out transactional costs. A lot of what we see in the system, handoffs between different agencies, handoffs between different partners, put a transactional cost in the system. So part of actually getting money out of the system was to actually, thank you, was to actually take out a lot of transactional costs through really looking at our own systems and processes. And I think the other thing to recognise was that if you salami slice prevention and early intervention, you are merely storing up huge amounts of cost at the high end cost of the pathway within 12 to 18 months. So it's a false economy, in other words. And I think Peter's background as an LSE trained economist was incredibly helpful here, because it actually helped reframe the way we thought about finance and resources in terms of how do we best invest what we've got to produce better outcomes. And I think that strong political leadership from him, from David Molyneux, who was the deputy leader and now is the council leader, was very important. One thing David said to me actually when public health came home in 2013 was, you've got a grant that comes with you, the public health grant, but if we only spend that on public health and don't think about the entire way in which the council invests its resources, staff and money to improve the health, well-being and lives of our citizens, then we've missed the whole point of public health coming back to local government. And what very wise words those are, and actually reflect what Michael Marmot was saying. Peter and David were very, I think, influenced by what Michael Marmot said in Fairer Society, Healthy Lives. And the little anecdote I will tell you, having taken them to see him present his interim report. Peter was a very tall man. He was about 6'7". I'm 5'1". And he came out of that room, and he was also, for a politician, a man generally of few words because he was so impressive in terms of his stature. And he looked down at me and said, "Kate, Marmot, that's how we're going to do public health in Wigan, isn't it?" To which the answer, of course, was, "Yes, leader."
Thank you, and that's very interesting in itself. That idea of financial risk, deciding we're going to do it and being prepared to take financial risk, is probably something that we're not that comfortable with. And the pump priming of transformation, certainly our experience, certainly within health, I can't speak for some of our other colleagues here, is we're good at putting in the pump priming, the additional non-recurrent funding to get transformation started. We're not very good at taking out the recurrent savings that it's meant to deliver. We end up double running for much longer. But any question, Maria? I think it is. Yep.
First of all, thank you very much for the presentation. I really thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'm really heartened to hear about the positive risk-taking that has gone on, because I think it's absolutely fundamental to any kind of constructive change. What I wanted to ask you about is, how do you stop messages getting lost in translation? Because, all of us in this room are skilled professionals. We've been doing this for a long time. But actually we're not very good at communicating our vision to the public, and also we're not always very good at hearing what they have to say back to us. And I just wonder, how do you manage the subtleties of that, that flow of traffic in either direction? Because it strikes me that that's probably key.
With the public, it's probably changed over time. So back in the early days, we used to do the deal listening into action sessions out in communities. So the politicians and people from the council would go out and sort of do that listening type exercise. And then that's changed, I suppose, over the years. And what we've been doing over the last couple of years is big listening. Well, first of all, we did the big listening project back in 2019, and the whole Deal 2030 concept, which is the next sort of 10 years of where we see the dreams and aspirations and how we want Wigan to be the best place, came out of that big listening project. So we went out, we spoke to 6,000 residents, we had drop-in sessions, we had digital booths, we went to schools, we went everywhere to talk to people. We put a big green sofa in the middle of places, so supermarkets, GP surgeries, schools, on the high street, you name it. It went out on the, it was, some of our staff were putting it in and out of a transit van and got bigger muscles by the end of it. And we did it in a non sort of typical survey type way. So we said, come and sit on the couch and let's have a talk. You live in Standish. What's your dreams for your children? What do you want to do differently? What are you not happy about, and what would you like to see in the future? So it was an asset-based, open conversation, not a predetermined, we're here on a consultation, I've got 10 questions that I need you to answer, and then I'm going. It was much more around that conversation, that big listening, and that's really helped us, I suppose, to try and become much more in tune of hopefully nothing getting lost in translation, but things do, don't they? We've got to be honest with each other, and there is still sort of spiky issues, but I think it helps to have that type of approach. And similarly with the staff, we do it with our teams and our staff, and we really embrace that. So we have big conversations, we have big listening exercises with our staff, and they will tell us how it is. And we've got to be prepared for that open dialogue and really go with it. And that's been a real journey, hasn't it, Kate?
Yeah, very much so, Mairead. It's about leadership having the confidence to be challenged and not take it personally as well. See it as really constructive challenge. I'll give you a sort of example. One of an example of perhaps the way I sort of approach the work. Directors of Public Health have to produce a statutory annual report. Who reads them? Exactly. Does it influence decisions? No. So I took a decision to not do a standard public health annual report, but in fact to create community movies. So worked with Martin Green, who is a local actor director, and Ian, his colleague, who is a BBC trained cameraman. What I did was set the theme for the year, and it was be something, that we were really, keen to sort of explore more with the community. The last one was actually called A Sense of Belonging, the last one I did before I retired. And that was all about arts, culture, heritage, the work of the libraries. Alison featured on it, because culture is her passion. What we did was to send Martin and Ian out to do filming over 9 months of the year, right across the borough, with a range of demographics. There were some key groups, we really wanted to hear from. And they would come back after 9 months with a wealth of material, all filmed. And he would do a first edit, and then we edit it down into a reasonable size. They're all on council YouTube. But the point about doing that was I didn't know what was going to come back from the community on the theme of culture and health, or housing and health and homelessness. What I was doing was listening to what they had to say and then framing my recommendations around what the community said. So instead of it being, technically my annual report, in fact, it was the borough's creative public health annual report. And doing it by film and listening to people's wisdom and experience was as much, a learning point for me as the person with the job title, as it was, that kind of engagement for the community, and, cut down snippets that people can show in community groups or take round the libraries, very important. So in other words, adopting a much more creative approach to communications was incredibly important. And we did that through COVID as well. One of the things I did through COVID was a fortnightly live Facebook Q&A with the public. I had no idea what they were going to ask me. They sometimes ask me about the markets, actually, Alison, so I used to have to defer that one. But we advertised it, and they were very popular. They were proved to be very popular because it was about that, having that trusted face and voice, but also accessible expertise that the public could question. They could send questions in advance if they wanted to. I could do an update on how COVID was doing in the borough and any national policy changes. But most of that half hour was devoted to people asking me questions live. And also being able to say, well, some of those things I can't answer now, but I'll go away and get you the answer. And then, feeding back again. So using, digital social media, using different types of communication, and it being highly interactive, and you being prepared to listen and act on what you were hearing is incredibly important.
Can I just add one tiny little thing there? So building on that would be to have a really strong PR and comms team. And part of that messaging is that you're continually messaging the same thing. So as a place, as an organisation, you try and be consistent so things don't get lost in translation. So we've got an amazing PR team and comms team. They're brilliant and they do amazing stuff. So invest in your PR and comms teams. Get really great people in there.
Thanks. A good message in there. Martina, could you, whoever's come asking, would you mind just saying who you are and where you're from for the benefit of everybody? But Martina, I think you're next.
Thank you so much. So my name is Martina Moore and I'm the Director within the Department of Health who's developing a new integrated care system here in Northern Ireland. So fascinating. I'm just sorry I missed this morning's presentation, and to be honest I think I could take the two of you into a room somewhere just to learn so much from what you said today. Probably a few different things that we want to reflect on. The difficult conversations, or the different, conversations is something really, really grasped on there. And I think you talked about it, bringing GPs into the room, bringing nurses into that training. And I just wanted to get some feedback from you and how you actually embrace that, to bring those other partners in at that point and really get them to commit to that, because I know how difficult it can be. You know, that was obviously the Wigan deal and it was driven by austerity, but how you brought those other people in at that early stage and kept them committed. I was thinking to what you said, you turned that around in 5 years. Great, because I think our reflection is, you know, when we're looking to change how we do things, when we're looking to change the population's outcomes, this is going to be a long-term challenge we've got. So how do we hold our nerve and keep everybody on board with this way of working as we make our way through that?
So we've got a partnership called the Healthier Wigan Partnership, which is bringing together the council, the social voluntary sector, the NHS, primary care, everybody in that family really. And that's been a big sort of OD development programme because we speak different languages, come from different organisations. So people have learned through the Healthy Wigan Partnership's probably in existence about 8 years. So it's very much been about trusted relationships. So picking up the phone to each other, learning about each other, working really closely with GPs, the hospital, doctors, and I suppose understanding what's high stakes and understanding what's low stakes, understanding where the tensions are. So it's really based on relationships. And then once you've got those relationships, you can then start to do the magic together. And I think that's where we've been able then to say, well, we did the deal training for all of the staff in the council first, and then people just wanted to come along. People wanted to buy into it. They could see the vision. They wanted to be part of it. But the Healthier Wigan Partnership, the whole concept around it is based on all of the same principles of the deal, all of the things that Kate and I talked about. So I think essentially it's been about a long journey of culture, organisational development, relationships and trust between all of the partners.
There was a quote somebody said over the last day or two, I can't remember who it was, but they said trust is the fuel that drives transformation. And I think the whole relationships and trust is so important to try to do things, have a bit of confidence of doing things together, and if they don't work, you know, they see if they fail fast and no blame, etc.
One of the things I would say to you is you can't put people just in a meeting room and expect them to get on. Yeah. You've got to be able, that OD, investment in OD and leadership development, and building those relationships and trust, and challenging bad behaviour as well. So because it's not just about sort of being all nicey and fun with each other. The trust has to be sufficient that you can actually challenge people's behaviour. Really important. The deal journey, that deal experience that we're talking about in terms of training, was also, it actually started off that it was the deal for our streets. It actually started off in environmental services as an experience, and then we adapted it working with NHS colleagues for NHS staff as well, so that people take through the journey and they can see when they do the deal experience, you know, NHS leaders who are part of that, which is incredibly important. One of the things I think Alison and I would both say to you about investing in people's development, get an anthropologist. Really important. The NHS is very good at systems and science, but actually it's understanding how people tick that's really important. So the best investment you could make is to get an anthropologist in and train staff and get them really experienced and confident in anthropology, because that really does make a big, big difference.
Okay, thanks. I think we have another question.
Yes, Roisin Coulter, South Eastern Trust. I'm over here.
Can we do some of that light? Sorry, guys, I think it's causing a wee bit of a problem. Could we manage without it, do we think? Or dim it at all? Thank you.
I actually think it's really great that you presented this morning and again this afternoon. So, listening to it twice and getting more information this afternoon has been so beneficial. So, I will say, and probably on behalf of a number of us, we have wanted to hear about the Wigan deal for a long time. So, thank you very much for finally making it over here. It's something that we have heard about, we've read about, and I do think it fits and sits very well with Northern Ireland. And just sitting reflecting, I could probably talk for half an hour. I'll try and keep it very brief, could say so much, but that's nothing new for me. But the Northern Ireland deal, I think that's where we need to go. I really do. I think that probably every single person in this room has bought in to this as a movement. And, there's tremendous opportunities. It's really, this is about optimism. This is about opportunities. This is about, how we want to go forward for our citizens and our communities. And there's a lovely line that, many of my predecessors taught me, which was, what are people that live in Northern Ireland really interested in? Honestly, they're not interested in whether it's the health service, whether it's the council, whether it's the fire service. They're interested in, what do you need to make your life work? And whenever I work with communities and through our community plan and partnerships, we're trying to join all of that up to say it doesn't matter to the person who the agency or the body is. So if that's the case, then how do we be radical and change? So, I'm reflecting myself. David says it how it is, and you're right, about cutting through the silos. Often we're contacting each other about who's responsible for this service, how could we do something in this space? And it's possible, but it's very, very chunky, and it's at a small scale. So I really think there is potential here for a couple of things. Over the last 2 days, we've been talking about the importance of leadership and the importance of keeping things simple. And my challenge out to us all, working particularly with our council partners, I think it's absolutely fantastic that they're here with us today. That says an awful lot. There's an awful lot that, the ingredients for success are here in Northern Ireland. There is a lot that you've heard, and I'll not repeat, about why we know we can move in this direction. But I would put out a plea to say, we're trying to do a lot of different things, and perhaps we need to simplify it. There is a challenge, and I will say, about, the Public Health Agency in Northern Ireland, how it works, where it sits, and how it goes forward. I do think there's opportunity. The integrated care system that Martina's leading, again, that's another thing. The community plan and partnerships, that's another thing. We've got our wellbeing hubs, we've got our healthy living partnerships, and is there something that we can do to really look on top of this to listen to people that live here and what is really important to them? I do think we can learn an awful lot from Wigan if we get the right people and make sure that we take our citizens with us. Do I think the politicians would buy into this? Absolutely, yes. And communities, they will buy into it. Absolutely. Because this is what you're demonstrating, Kate and Alison, improved outcomes, improved health and well-being, and happier people living in their communities. So this is something I think that in the middle of all the crisis and everything else that we've been talking about over the last 2 days, this is where we need to focus. This is where we need to go forward. So, the thing is, can we do something different to co-locate teams and agencies in one place? I'm going to finish now.
No, I'm not interrupting you. I want to use. I think, can we use what Roisin just said to do something different in our last? We said this will go to 5:15. We'll get out at 5:15. Can we take, based on Roisin said, which is what I wanted to get to really from today's session, can you take 5 minutes in your tables to give some thought to what you've heard, what David's response to, I think particularly what Roisin is saying there. And we've got to be honest, folks, if we don't think there's something different in this or new or possible, equally let's say it, but is there something in what we've heard this afternoon that we think provides another opportunity here, a better opportunity? if to do something differently than we're currently doing. If so, what is that? What is it that we would need to do to get some of those outcomes? Could you have a chat for 5 minutes at your tables with feeding back? And we'll try to feed back, there's not that many tables, we'll try to take most of them. Can we feed back on the 1 or 2 things that you think that coming out of today, that instead of leaving here and saying that was all very interesting and we carry on and don't do anything differently, is there something that you think we need to actually plan to do and how we might take that forward? And then we'll give each of our panel an opportunity just to comment on that and bring it to a close. Happy to do that. I do see the tables aren't, they're fairly sitting in groups from organisations. If anybody feels inclined to do a little bit of moving and sharing or dividing some of those groups a bit, please do that. But 5 minutes just talking at your tables to feed back on what do we do from this session. Thanks. Okay, folks, hopefully some thinking coming out of that. So can we do it fairly quickly? We'll go through a couple of tables and then ask if anybody's anything else to add to that. So anybody want to start? From what you've heard, do you think there is something there, particular learning for us, something we might do different that needs some action? If so, what might that be? Michelle?
So we reflected on how we engage with our population, or how we tend to engage now, which is largely we need to do something. We need to do something really, really quickly. So we go out, fairly transactional. What do you think of this? And then we take that back and do something. And what we were saying at our table was we feel there's a kind of the big Northern Ireland conversation to be had with our population, but that it is locally sensitive. And I think you're absolutely right, sensitive for lots of different reasons here in Northern Ireland. But we also talked about the risks of that. The worst thing that you can do is go out and have a conversation with a population and then do what you were always going to do. So our message is partnering in Northern Ireland to have a conversation. And that conversation really is mostly one way. It's a listening journey.
Now, one way or the other way?
Yeah. Well, sorry, the term we used was meeting people where they're at, not where we're at.
Okay, thanks, Michelle. Anybody else? I did see that Roisin was maybe the only person, was she, who did what I asked and went and joined a different table. So come on, there must be something coming out of that table. There's too many sitting around it not to have some thoughts. Yep.
We're going to get Roger.
I think some of the conversation we had was around the need for us to show shared leadership and joint resource, and we thought those were 2 things that would be particularly key for us here in Northern Ireland to making some of this work, understanding how we all come together as parts of a bigger picture and let go of some of that, the parts that are looking only at our own organisations and the things that we're trying to drive, and find a better way than we currently have to pull those things together. And to find a way then to make that actually happen, because that's the bits we're struggling with at the minute, is the shared leadership and the joint resourcing.
And any thoughts of, so that's what we're lacking, any thoughts how we would actually make progress in that? I'm trying to get to the what and who.
At our table anyway, we had a conversation around the opportunity still within community planning. We know it's had varied success across Northern Ireland. There are elements of best practice there definitely to be hooked into, but there's a mechanism there, and there's an opportunity. We're just at the right time now to look at making the most of that mechanism that we have. When we look at integrated care partnerships, when we look at some of the opportunities coming forward around peace, when we look at all of those things that are happening at the minute, this is the time to make community plan and take it to that next level and see if we can use that as the mechanism rather than starting again with another set of very similar initiatives and governance. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? This table, and then
the conversation with ourselves was very much on the last speaker's point about the political support and will. And again, not one, but starting with the challenge around when you've got political leaders who are very focused on their department, there isn't huge opportunities around that collaborative mindset or the support to collaborative funding and risk-taking. But what we talked about here was actually trying to take what the example has been in Wigan, trying to come from that innovative position And certainly from my background, where I've seen success in this, having worked in England and Northern Ireland, is actually applying an evidence base that it's very difficult for those in leadership not to go with you on that journey. Now, 14 years ago, it was probably an early stage around the evidence base about a preventative approach and getting upstream. But actually, we've sat and listened to an evidence base this afternoon, and there are other examples. So it's almost grasping the evidence base of why this isn't something we should do. It's something that we cannot afford not to do, and get upstream and have that preventative approach. And actually, you get the main players and partners. Again, there's some legislative changes which enable that in England, in my experience, to come together a bit more straightforward than here. That shouldn't prevent us. Just use that evidence base to say why these are the outcomes that are important for our public, and use an innovative mindset to make that. And the one point we stressed here was that this was going to be about soft skills, the cultural piece. And I was really interested in hearing more, even from Alison, around how you actually turn services who are focused on transactional, on the majority of their work, into a transformational mindset where they put the citizen at the centre of the services being delivered. Because in Northern Ireland, we're heavily public sector led. So how you actually get that transformation of getting that citizen in the leadership role and informing the information to shape the services.
Well, I'll ask them maybe to pick that up in final remarks when I ask each of the three. So,
I'm going to go to this table, but I'm going to make a comment. Yes, can I just say, Jane Brady, we've got a new head of civil service, and we've got a massive programme for government with loads and loads of priorities, and she's working on a set of 3 key things that we might be able to do. So there might be an opportunity to align around whatever those 3 things are. So when that comes.
Thanks, so we're going to go to comments coming in online, and then I think this table at the front, and we'll pause at that and give each of our 3 panel members an opportunity to comment. So what are we getting online?
So some great comments online. Anne Hardy has commented, I agree with the comments, and we have all the ingredients already. And we also have the structures, 3 main partnerships: community planning, CYP, SP, and civil contingencies, emergency preparedness. There's much going on at a community level. It needs to join together across councils, from community to strategic. And we need resilience through an entire systems approach, and it's one way in which we're looking at underpinning an entire model.
Okay, thanks, and thank you, Anne, for sending that in. And then I think lastly, we'll come to this table at the front.
It's just building on actually the Roshan's table over there. I think it's about agility, and what we've heard quite a lot is about actually taking action. And I think for us, it's probably reflecting on perhaps we spend too much time, particularly in central government, about developing processes as opposed to taking action. And there's maybe something, from the community planning partnerships and what we're trying to do with the integrated care system, which is really to actually work with community planning partnerships and build on what's there and actually take some action now of doing something together.
I couldn't agree more, Martina. I have to say I am much in the let's just do something. Can we just, doing nothing's the worst option usually. Let's just do something, and let's all be careful how we interpret that, what permission we need. I wonder sometimes, are we slightly cautious in that, and let's get on and do. Look. Yeah.
Let's not lose sight of everything that we have done and how we have worked together. I think the environment is here to enable us to make different decisions. And the point that Martina made is absolutely right. We can't be hampered by all of these processes, procedures, risk assessments, business cases, and all the rest of it. I think now is the time for leadership, cross-system leadership, to be able to take things forward for communities. I really think if we're serious about this, some of the things that you put out to us, Kate and Alison, are told us how you've done it. So if you can do it, why can we not do it? Why can we not co-locate partners and agencies together in one place? We need to join up communication. I'm sure you can hear how passionate I am about this, but I am really, really committed. to getting sensible, consistent public messaging out to the communities of Northern Ireland. Why would Newry Morning Down Council, Ards and North Down Council and Lisburn Castlereagh Council and the South Eastern Trust all develop 4 different straplines, 4 different visions, missions, statements, documents, 4 different communication teams? Honestly, we've got to stop this industry, because, you know, we're choking people up with words.
And good point, rushing.
Thank you very much, for the way. Sorry.
But that does sound like a potential for some further discussion coming out of today. Last, because I'm now about to fail miserably in getting you out here at 15:15. So last comment here at this table, and then we'll 1 minute each from our panel to pick up any final comments.
Thank you, Michael. I'm from the Innovation Lab, Malcolm Beatty. One of the things that struck me during COVID, and Robert and I were on a working group led by Peter May, the pace at which decisions can be made, and the clarity of thought and the pace, we've lost that again. So how do we get it back? And that's part of this equation. Surely, let's get rid of the bureaucracy. Let's try and make quicker decisions and add that wee bit of risk in, but do them sensibly. I'm appealing, I don't want COVID back, but let's get the mindset back. Thank you.
Absolutely, Malcolm. And let's take the positive from that we know we can do it. Shows you who really runs things around here. Every time I say last, Heather says if one more. So.
Sorry, yeah, you'll not want to hear from me. No, Dorina Carville, Controller and Auditor General. So, so just listening today, and thank you for your talk. It has been congratulations on what you've done as well, because I think there's a lot that we can learn from you. What I was most taken by was the slide around behaviours, actually, and courage and accountability being up there side by side. You know, you would expect me to say that, but you know, we will always have accountability for public money. And I don't think anyone ever loses sight of that, quite genuinely. I think we all have that concern. But what we do have to do is get to a point where we are balancing risk and innovation. And I think that is the key. And what we're hearing today is just the importance of collaborative partnership working in that space. And, you know, you've talked about it at a community level. We're talking about it here at council, cross-sectoral level. But it needs to even be at a wider Northern Ireland level as well, and bring, you know, regulators in, dare I say, you know, to move away from the blame culture perspective as well. Our political leaders, I don't know how we bring our media colleagues with us on that, because they play a part here as well in that blame culture. But we do need to move to supporting risk and innovation, and, you know, moving away from a negative blame culture to one where we accept mistakes and learn from them and move on. So I think we have all got a very important role to play in that, including organisations like myself. Well, you may not feel that.
No, probably especially including organisations like yourself, Dorina, because I think it'd be really important that you're in part of that discussion and understand if we do think there's a need to do things differently, making sure that it's seen as appropriate governance around it. So thank you very much for that. I'm going to have to say 60 seconds each, folks. So David, maybe start with yourself, moving back up the line.
Okay, thank you for that, Michael. So I think it's tough on agencies, isn't it? We've all got our own pressures, our own challenges, our own budget challenges in there, as well as our own priorities. But it's a fragmented approach we've got just now, isn't it? Community planning partnerships, there's a statutory requirement for partners to be around the table, but maybe that's actually hindering some of this as well, because you can tell with the body language that some are there because they're told by a piece of paper that they've got to be in the room. So for me, maybe when I look at the community planning partnership in our area, the best work that's done is the relationships on the ground amongst the frontline workers. So how do we actually grasp some of that and make a change? And it's maybe going to have to be bottom up in some of this. I think if we're talking about a Northern Ireland wide level, we'll still be talking about this in 3 years' time. For me, I want to be having a conversation with Roisin over how do we start making a change across those two organisations. And if there's partners wanting to come with us, then we bring them together. Let's demonstrate change. Let's demonstrate change quickly. Seek quick wins amongst willing partners, and let's just get on and get it done.
Great, thank you. David, Alison?
Was that 60 seconds?
I didn't time.
It was. You did very well, getting all of that in. I thought you did very well. I'd probably just start by saying, I think we said at the beginning, didn't we, that there's so many gifts and talents in this room already, and there's so much experience. So this room can make it happen. And as you said, the Coalition of the Willing in COVID did. You know, if we can take anything from that, we did make it happen in COVID, didn't we? Wherever you were, we made it happen. And we made it happen because it was about relationships. We all knew that we had to get on and make it happen. So if we think about anything in this room today, learn to trust each other, learn to just put relationships at the heart of everything that you do, and you can make change, you can make it happen. I think that's what you've got to hang on to, because that's what we're here for, isn't it, as public servants, and that's what it's about.
Great. Thanks, Alison. Really important. And Kate?
Again, it's sort of echoing what Alison and David said, but one strong piece of advice I would give you: focus on one health outcome. Stop having lots of different strategies for different things. Have one strategy on a page, one outcome that you can focus the whole of society and the whole of the system around. And then work through your narrative, your empowerment, and those kind of principles of conversation with the community. Be it healthy life expectancy, be whatever it is. Just focus on one thing, because we found focusing on one thing enabled the whole system to change. And those healthy life expectancy is on the back of improvements in CVD, in lung cancer, reduction in lung cancer, reduction in smoking. And by the way, all the risk factors for all of those impact on the risk of vascular risk dementia as well, which we've seen coming down.
Thanks, Kate. Thanks, everybody. Fascinating conversation. I think we could go on for quite some time, but we must bring it to an end. Thank all of you for staying to the end to be part of that. Thank the Chief Executive Forum for organising this afternoon's event. Anne Dixon, Director from CEF, thanks, and pass that on, please, to David and colleagues. But a special thanks, everybody, please, for Kate and Alison from Wigan, from David, also from Lisburn and Castlereagh for their discussion today. Safe home, folks. I suspect you might have a few people following you fairly soon, but let's show our appreciation with Thanks, everybody.